Greetings, this is I, Tentus Narrative Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome one and all. How are you doing today? I hope everybody out there is doing well, and you are ready for another exciting episode. Whether you're joining me, of course, live over on Twitch, or later on YouTube. Greetings. For those of you on YouTube, though, please remember to, of course, go by the words I always say and appease the dark algorithm at very least until, the cows come home. That's not a word. Please appease the dark algorithm. Just like, subscribing, the bell, leave a comment, all that kind of stuff that helps with the algorithm and fight against it and gets our videos into more people's eyes so more of them can learn about this stuff. Hey, there you go. The amount of time I do not know English is surprisingly good. So today, though, we're hitting up another ancestry. One that's not really played by players very much. Theoretically, could be. It's really an ancestry that's more hostile. And not necessarily because they are terrible people overall, but just because of their a bit of superiority and the control they have. Sedacthy is what we're going to talk about. Or as they were known for most of first edition, Sea Devils or Sahuagin. I can never pronounce them correctly. Just go watch me in Buccaneers chapter see it anymore. I'm just going to call them what they are known as now, in second edition, Sedacthy, because it's a much easier word for me to pronounce. I don't pronounce things very well. I think that should be obvious for this challenge, whether live or not. English not work very good for language. It's not what I dive into. I study math. But yes, we're going to talk about them today and go into some information about them. And of course, where do I start with all of these things? I start with sources, because I do think that's a good thing for doing further studies and information beyond where I'm going to here. You want to dive deeper. The bestiary from first edition Pathfinder. It's what introduced us to them as the Sahuagin. The Monster Codex further dived into them in alternate types of them. The campaign settings on a lot of the positioning they were in there, along with Percy's World Guide about where they were in the world. And of course, if you go to the Island of Empty Eyes in Skulls and Shackles, it deals a lot with them in some of the information there too, and their existence. So these are the books that are kind of diving into it, and that especially within the Shackles. It does get into some cultural and things like that there. If you go to second editions, the Monster Core would be the one I would recommend now, because this is the updated version that's updating a lot of this lore and stuff to where we are now, and information about them we have at this point in time. So that's the story from before, that's the story from now, and I'll show a picture of what they kind of look like that I managed to find online for the second edition version updated, but this is the old first edition into early second edition that we have for English for Sedacthy. Sedacthy. So who are they? Well, they are the most populous aquatic ancestry in Golarian's oceans. That's the first thing about them that you have to know is, of all the aquatic species that deal within Golarian's oceans, they're the most common. And this can be a problem for a lot of the other races of the oceans, much to their chagrin, but it is true, there's the most of them. If you would look at one, they are the cross between your general humanoids and fish. They stand about 7 feet tall, have 2 arms, 2 legs, a tail that ends in a fish-like fin, propelled through the water. Their head is very piscine, very fish-like, with a mouth that gapes like a fish, and filled with sharp, flesh-rending teeth. Pretty interesting basics there. Now, if you look at them physically, a female will lay a clutch of 200 eggs. They will lay them in well-protected chambers, and depending on the size of the settlement of the Sedacthy, they can have from 1 to a dozen of these specific egg chambers. After about 3 months, these eggs hatch, and the hatchlings begin to turn on each other in a violent breeding frenzy. After about a year of survival in this, basically, situation where the eggs have hatched and they cull each other out, the parents return and claim offsprings that were basically the most clever, the most fast, or the strongest to survive here. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're the most strongest, you could be the fastest, you could be the most clever. It's just that these young figured out a way to survive. And yeah, the parents will claim them then. Recognizing their young by scent. If, for whatever situation, there is unclaimed young, either because the parents have died or there's just a situation they cannot recognize them, these young are still raised by the community. They still will raise them communally. It's just that they will, have the community behind them rather than just their parents, and probably won't be as into the situation. Sedacthy grows their limbs in about 6 months. So they're very fish until about 6 months in anyway. And they reach about a height of 5 feet tall by the age of 1. So about the time that they're gathered up, they're pretty large. And their final adult size is reached in about 6 years. They grow large, but do not get feeble as they age. So they keep growing in size. And there are some Sedacthy rulers that have been known to live for centuries. Though your average Sedacthy, unfortunately, doesn't live past 30, they tend to die violent deaths. So that is the culture they come from. So there is a little bit of survival of the fittest, whether it's clever, fast, or strong, especially when they're young and don't really develop. But by the time they're 1 year and they've culled each other out a great deal, the remaining ones are young. So let's dive into a little where they live, what kind of groups they live in. So they are adapted for any aquatic environment. That's important to note. Regardless of pressure or temperature, they are adapted. That's another reason that they can be in pretty much any ocean, and they've been able to spread the way they have. They're very adaptable. They still prefer warmer coastal waters because that's an area where they've got a lot of food and prey that's very plentiful for them. There even are some that have settled on the plane of water. We'll talk about that. Let's talk about their society. They are intelligent, and they're very orderly beings. They basically have a natural bloodlust to them. Very much shark, feeding frenzy, but they do their best to basically suppress this, and it's a battle with each of them. And a small provocation could be a tip-off for them in that eternal battle against their bloodlust. And in order to satiate that bloodlust, they do periodically revel in bloody waters. They basically do a feeding frenzy. This is to satiate that internal bloodlust that they fight against naturally. Because they are intelligent beings and they recognize that they can't allow that to control them, it is though something they fight against all the time. Those that don't manage to control their bloodlust or satiate in any way can become very either lethargic, they kind of break down, or the opposite end, they become highly murderous and dangerous. So, yeah, those that can't control their emotions just either lose it completely or just go completely murderous. Now, their society is fairly ruthless, but it is technically an order meritocracy. Titles are earned through prowess and skill and lost with incompetence. If you show signs of weakness, you risk death. Children of nobles within their society have more opportunities in training, while those of commoners tend to fend for themselves as they're maturing. But Sedacthies take pride in powerful relatives, in this case too. But bloodline doesn't really matter when it comes down to it. So we can see that already. If you're in a noble, higher-end position, you have more opportunities to learn and become stronger, to get that better opportunities, to get to that position where you have the skills and prowess. While if you're a commoner, you have to earn that right a lot more. And taking pride that you had those powerful relatives that maybe pushed you in that direction is good, but again, not critical. Because if a commoner has a very ambitious child, they very well could rise themselves up to be a king or queen within Sedacthy society. While if you're a royal that has an inept offspring, just end up like food. Again, it comes down to not only do they have to survive as first times, they have to survive the society too. Noble Sedacthy aspire to subjugate others and become rulers of an empire. So, because of this, Sedacthys are constantly at war against each other. Their kings encouraging these petty feuds to satiate bloodlust, control their numbers, and hone their skills. A little bit of all of them. And they don't want to get out of the way because, food supply, satiate bloodlust, and, maybe get more skill to the warriors they have. The goal of Sedacthys is to basically dominate the seas, and they view the other aquatic species, especially aquatic elves, Athamuras, merfolk, and tritons, as basically food, game, or those to be enslaved. They do have a hate and respect relationship with two other groups, the Golthus and the Krakens, who tend to be the greatest threats to Sedacthys and their superiority. The only creatures that they get along with are actually sharks, because they can communicate with them telepathically, and also in similar reason the shark-like Adarans, because they have that similar connection to sharks, and they are a type of shark creature. Sedacthys do have their own species of servitor sharks they've developed and bred, called the feeders in the depths, which are a little bit more intelligent than your average sharks, but also more bloodthirsty than them. Other than these connections that they have, there are Sedacthys that have enslaved sea monsters, like dragon turtles in the Beast of Battle. So they will also manage to gather up and control other creatures. Now, here's a place in Golarion where we have a council of things. And this is, of course, something I've mentioned with the River Kingdoms before. The Outsea. So if you look at Golarion, though Sedacthys can be pretty much anywhere, preferring the temperate or warmer waters, places like the Obari Ocean Inner Sea or the Arcadian Ocean are where they are primarily found. They will build vast cities in the ocean's depth that rival some of the metropolises on the surface, and create impregnable fortresses near shorelines which they can frequently launch raids against land dwellers. They're also in constant conflict with the other aquatic creatures, merfolk, Kutax, the Ogolthus, and this warlike tendency that they do have, and aggression that they do have made them one of the planets, Golarion's, most hated ancestors, because they are so aggressive and warlike. And they're in a position where they can take advantage of it in the oceans, where they don't really have rivals the same way as other more aggressive warlike beings have on land. The ocean species just don't have the numbers to fight back against them in a lot of ways. Maybe to hold their own, but not to fight back and get rid of them. And that aggression is part of their nature. So the Shackles is a big place where they have, particularly in the western isles of the Shackles, around the city port of Olo. It is also one of the most dominant ancestors of the amphibious river kingdom Outsea, where they do live in relative peace with the native merfolk. But the important thing about Outsea, it means that Sedacthys can be more peaceful. Places like Outsea, where they needed to be, they did. They adapted. It's just that they're never put in that situation where they need to. In TNZ, most of them are found around there, living in the undersea kingdom of Ziado. They are smaller than the more dominant Athamuras. They will also dwell in many of the caverns and crevices that honeycomb the underwater Imaro Trench, where they are in constant conflict with the Marrow tribes. In Casmaron, a group of them control the mangrove islands and shallow waterways of the Cooperin Swamp in southern Vudra. They defend the swamps from the various rampaging aberrations that ravage most of the rest of the Open Bridge region. And in about 4720, they were investigating some ruins in the swamp's depth. In the Okayo Ocean, most of them live in the Sintos Trench, where more than anywhere else in Golarion, they have a true empire now. The capital has a name that's quite unpronounceable to the other species, but is called Furyugi, and is home to approximately 10,000 Sedacthys and a large number of Ardos, sharks, other mutants, and those that have been slain. And I will tell you, we don't know a lot about Frio Deep, other than where it's at, and it's ruled by Kinlid High, an old one Sedacthy that has no sign of aging. So we don't know a lot about it overall, but we know it exists. And of course, there are other rumors. Can mention that there seems to have possibly been an old abandoned Sedacthy city that existed on the floors of Rabagumi's island of Nuat in the western coast, but there hasn't been full investigation of it. So that means we could find ancient ruined or abandoned cities of the Sedacthys in places. Now I do want to, Pathfinder and Golarion, mention, of course, the Plane of Water. Boom! Hey, we mentioned that they do live there. Basically, some thousands of years ago, at behest of some long-forgotten prophet, a number of them immigrated there. A large group of them. And basically, soon after they arrived soon after the death of the final Saline Paladesh, Nufar the Great, and the demise of the Phaedon Empire that was within the plane. So, basically, the controlling genies of the Plane of Water, their empire broke. It was a great point in time for them to arrive. So they spent centuries carving out a vast empire for themselves. Unfortunately, this empire fell to infighting. So now, there isn't one vast united empire of Sedacthys in the Plane of Water. There's countless smaller kingdoms controlled by warlords, hulking mutants, strange religious cults, that all seek to recreate the ancient empire with themselves as a head and battle each other constantly. So, yeah. They did have a big empire at one point in time, infighting broken apart, now they just battle each other. So, here's an image that I do want to find, because it's one I found, and all the way over at the side here, the fish dude, that's the Monster Core's version of Sedacthy. You can see it is very similar in a lot of ways to this one here, but a lot of artistically different, but you can still see, we can see that there is the similarity in the way that they kind of redone how they look. I like the new look on them. It feels a lot more like fish monster-y and stuff like that, and, because these things are aggressive and tend to be very opponent-type creatures, I'm fine with that, but it also is just very fish. Anyway, the others are just there because, it's the image I found. Monster Core hasn't been out that long, so it's not been art. Mutations. We should talk about. Because Sedacthys have very unique genealogy that they are prone to random and useful mutations. Now, within Sedacthy society, the mutations that are come into being are seen as divine blessings. And those that usually get them rise to power, if they survive the hatcheries. Basically, you just have to survive the hatchery in the first place. If you survive and have a mutation, you're seen as something important. The two most common ones are, first off, four-armed Sedacthys. They basically have an extra set of arms. Basically, about 1% of every surviving hatchling is this. A little bit more rare and infamous is the Malenti, who are Sedacthy that look exactly like aquatic elves. They have a lot less of a fearsome appearance, but they have the same bloodthirsty hearts as any other Sedacthy, and live up to it. And physically are much the same, they just look pretty much like an aquatic elf. There are some other ones, beyond these two, that are a little rarer, but we can talk about. There's some ones that are known as prehistoric Sedathys, or Adicthes, who are a little bit larger and powerful, and they are basically seen as a throwback to the species' ancient past. They are actually found in habitats with aquatic dinosaurs and megafauna, and communicate with them in addition to sharks. So an area where some prehistoric creatures have survived, you will find Sedacthy that throwback things. Shark-blooded Sedathys are normally large mouths with sharper teeth, much more shark-like, and only Piscine's lower bodies, very similar to that of Murpha, so no legs. So the arms, though. And they're found in communities with a lot more sharks than normal, or there's a large shark hatcheries nearby. So you can find these shark-blooded Sedathys in areas where there's just more sharks. Sightless Sedathys have no eyes, pallid skin, and glowing lungs capable of mesmerizing other creatures. They live near ancient evil sites, in flooded caverns, or abysses of the sea. And the spine Sedacthy are covered in hundreds of spines that protect them from physical attacks. And usually when there's an area of massive hunting aquatic predators, you can find these. So basically they're living in an area with a lot of dangers of much bigger things. But those are your general mutants Sedacthy variety. And that's Sedacthy. So I hope you enjoyed learning about them. And certainly speaking, they are an aggressive species. It is a species that is, though, not necessarily impossible to make deals with and negotiate. That's the thing is, they are ruthless and violent, but they are organized and have a society. They could be seen as lawful. And yes, their bloodthirsty, violent, warlike nature does do them wrong. Look at on land. We have a lot of problems that happen along with the hobgoblins. I've done videos with them. They're another very warlike, militarized group that has an organization. They have begun to carve out their own area, as it has been a lot of wars and battles that they've had to go through, and a lot of problems. That's something that they had to do, and to fight against a lot of other species, to basically, in a way, learn lessons that they can still be themselves without going to some extremes and stuff like that. And we can see in places like Outsea, Sedacthy are still themselves. They still have a very violent, meritocracy thing where they have to fight each other for superiority, and the strongest and best are the ones that rule them because they proved themselves and they didn't make mistakes. And they have to go through a lot to do that. But they can get along with the other species and make peace. So it's not impossible for them. But again, it's just in most situations, they are not in a position where they can learn lessons that make it mean, don't punch your neighbors. It's not really a great idea. In general. Or treat your neighbors with a level of respect. Again, that's why a lot of them don't. It's one of those things, is the majority of them don't. They see anything else just as maybe food, something to hunt, or just something to take as a slave. You know, they just don't have the respect or understanding of the other species. With that, it doesn't mean you won't go to war with you, but, you know, you can at least get to the negotiation table when they learn that. It's an interesting point to be in, and it's one of those things kind of similar to other species I've talked about, like when I talked about Knoll. How, like, there's those that give a bad name, and a lot of them that are very different in the way they go, but have very unique views that make you kind of hard to understand them. In this case, unfortunately, the vast majority are the ones that give Sedacthy a bad name, and there are some exceptions to that, and really maybe the shift would be something great for them, but nothing major has happened in society, and until it does, boom. Maybe when the Golfers do something awful and catastrophic, or the Krakens do, they'll learn to get along with everybody else. Who knows? That may be a storyline for the future, or maybe not. Maybe we'll never touch on it in Pathfinder. Anyway, I think that's a great place to leave it off there. Keep learning about them today. And we kind of get an understanding of them. Please make sure to check out anything else I do, whether it's live, like this is typically recorded, or join me later on YouTube. It's usually a day or two later that I put them up. In general, if you want to join me when I'm live, the general schedule for tabletop-related stuff on Twitch is Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, early to mid-afternoon, depending on the day, and life schedule. And Thursday being the Pathfinder day. Live play Pathfinder First Edition on Wednesdays at 9, Crimson Queen. So shout that one out, and discussing tabletop on Saturdays. Tabletop discussion show, podcast night. And again, you can catch all of the tabletop stuff up on YouTube. All the other stuff I do on Twitch, you can just join me for. I social media, link below, and I guess we'll leave it there, and I will say till the next time, I bid all of you a deep and wonderful farewell.